Good afternoon, my friends. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can be with you forever. I'm going to be leaving my email in the description, so if you want a personalized tarot reading, astrology chart reading, spiritual guidance, production lessons as well, anything at all, please feel free to hit me up and we can arrange an appointment. And as well, I'll be offering my YouTube membership program, and the descriptions of what kind of programs you could subscribe to are in the description below. And I'm also going to be momentarily setting up a Patreon, just so it's going to be the same aspect as the YouTube membership thing, but it's just a different format. So if you're more comfortable using Patreon instead of YouTube, you can use that. I'm going to be utilizing it the same way and uploading daily videos and such as soon as I get that rolling. But now on to the topic at hand that I want to discuss. And this is something that I've been thinking about on and off. It's not really something that it's particularly the most interesting, but it's definitely something that's fascinating. And that's the concept of, spirit animals and what's the connotation and meaning behind, what a spirit animal is and what it means when we identify with a spirit animal. And then there's also the more popular format of that, which is being a furry. If you don't know what a furry is, it's primarily sexual, but there's a lot of non-sexual furries, I think, that exists, although I haven't met any personally. But yeah, basically their whole thing is dressing up in a cartoon animal suit. I don't know if you would call it a suit. It's just like, one of those things you would wear if you would go to Disneyland and they have a guy dressed up as like Goofy and he has that big giant cartoon thing all around him to make him look like Goofy. It's basically that, but in this very specific aesthetic of the furry, which is like this cartoon animal, so to speak. And there is a huge community of furries, obviously. I've encountered several on the internet. I have in real life, but I've never had a conversation with one, let's say. I've had one bark at me in public. That's the extent to my relationship with furries in real life, but online there are several furries I've interacted with for some reason. And, it got me thinking, what's the connotation, and is there a connotation between furry fandom and furry scene in general with the spirit animal, the spiritual aspect of the animal and how we can identify with an animal? Because there is a lot of parallels, I find. If you've ever seen that YouTube video, it was kind of viral for a little bit. It was like, I forget what he says exactly, but it's like one of those TLC reality TV shows where this guy is like, it's like, my spirit animal is a wolf, or on all levels except physical, I am a wolf. And then he starts like, yip, like starts barking a little bit, which is kind of funny. And that's kind of like, I would say, like the middle ground, I guess, of furry fandom versus spirit animal. And as someone who is into the concept of spirit animals, and it's related to me a lot because, first of all, people online specifically call me Wolf. Not that I chose that name specifically, it just started happening. People started calling me that because I used my vaporwave alias when I was into that 5 years ago. Not anymore, but I used that alias Wolfenstein wosX, and so people just started calling me Wolf, which was kind of cool. I'm not going to complain with a nickname like that, obviously, but it's just a nickname. It's not really that important to me. I kind of am not really a kind of person to tell people what they should call me. They can call me whatever they want. But I will say that the wolf aspect of who I am is very prevalent. And although I'm not a furry, I don't have a wolf suit that I put on to feel like a wolf. It's primarily a familial ancestral aspect related to my character, because my last name, which I won't necessarily say, is means wolf basically. In it's Italian, but I'm Romanian, descent. I don't know. It's a weird historical thing. There's some weird discrepancies because I technically have an Italian name mixed with Romanian, Russian aspects. And it's kind of weird, but that's my name, and it means wolf, son of wolf, more specifically. And that's a concept or at least a character trait that I sort of identify with, of being a wolf, of being, there's this inner drive, so to speak, this inner hunger for accomplishment, right? My family history is rooted a lot in business and entrepreneurial aspects, and this hunger to survive and this need to hunt, a lot of it dealing a lot with sex and predatory instincts that are part of my genetics. So that aspect of the spirit animal I find very rooted in me. For what reason, I'm not entirely sure, but it's there for a reason. And it's interesting to talk about. There's a book that I read which is really good, called The Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse, who's a nice bridge, I would say, into Eastern thought, if you want to call it that, just because he was very into Buddhism and Taoism and all that crap. And, he talks about the Steppenwolf in this book. It's a work of fiction. It's like a memoir, so to speak, of like an old man trying to find, meaning and happiness, all that existential stuff. And he comes in touch with, his inner wolf, so to speak, the inner predator, the inner, how would you call it? Just the inner animal. And I feel like a lot of people have an inner animal that they represent themselves through. And the inner animal, or your fursona, you could call it, is rooted in, a lot about your character. You can look at astrology, for instance, to find out more about your animal. But it's more, I would say, rooted in ancestry, and you have to look at it from a more physical plane and more of an earthly plane, so to speak, because animals are part of the earth, right? Animals aren't really, humans sort of have elevated themselves off of earth, and we're living in like an in-between zone, so to speak, utilizing our intellect and rational brains and developing our spiritual minds to go beyond what is earth. We've literally left earth and gone into outer space. We've landed on the moon. We're planning on going to Mars. We've sent satellites up there. So we've managed to leave earth, and animals don't leave. They don't go anywhere except for birds, but they're still in earth, you know what I mean? They still have to fly in the air, and they still have to come down to the earth to get their food, all this stuff. We could hypothetically, move everyone into outer space and live in a space station if we wanted to. That's the difference between humans and animals in that kind of way. So when we're looking at animals and animal spirits and your fursona, it's very much rooted in an earthly aspect. And the way I would see it and think about it, a lot of where these ancestry aspects come from could come evolutionary. We were all animals at one point, hundreds and thousands of years ago. We were apes and all that stuff, but there is still a link to every animal because we've all, started life at the same time. We were all dinosaurs, and then we've evolved and devolved, and there was, I'm not really much of an evolutionary expert or understanding Darwinism that much, although I should research him and read, because I have one of his books. I haven't read it yet. But it's still interesting stuff to think about when we think about how, all animals are somewhat connected, and, apex predators from back in the day, millions of years ago, have become prey now. If you think of like the Tyrannosaurus Rex is now, hypothetically or theoretically, according to some hypothesis, is now evolved into the chicken, which we all consume on a daily basis. It's not a predator anymore. I wouldn't call a chicken a predator. And, it's those kinds of things that are interesting. And, there is that aspect that we are in touch with our inner animal, and there is that aspect is in every human. And, I think there is a tendency to overthink that concept. There is a culture, especially in the furry community, where they overly identify with their spirit animal, which, I feel like exists. They have justification to prove that it exists. But the thing about the spirit animal is that the spirit animal, in my view, is not something to attach yourself to or to identify with overly, but you accept it that this is what makes you an individual, what makes you a human being, and you utilize that to address your deeper, more human goals, so to speak, your up-leveled goals, if you want to call it that, because the animal is sort of devolved from humans, right? We're going backwards if you're getting in touch with your spirit animal. And if you want to get into reincarnation, which is more of a Buddhist perspective, when you identify with the animal, the inner predator, the inner, ego, so to speak, because that's what really the spirit animal sort of is in a lot of ways. It's pretty much the ego. It's the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain that's inside that I've discussed in previous videos. And when you overlay identify with that, in my view, if you believe in reincarnation, which I do to some degree, I'm still fuzzy on that because this is the afterlife. It's a big mystery, so to speak, right? But let's say you do believe in reincarnation. Reincarnation isn't just a straightforward thing like, oh yeah, I reincarnate into another human and you base my karma. You can reincarnate in hell, you can reincarnate in heaven, you can become one with source, you can become Buddha, or you can reincarnate into an animal, which is kind of going backwards. You kind of don't really want to be an animal, because when you're an animal, you're not in control of anything. You're not a human and be able to rationalize and control things and make decisions. Most importantly, make choices, make decisions in your life, choose your destiny, which is what humans do. Animals have to live within whatever destiny is befallen on them, right? You look at a wolf doesn't choose how to live its life. It's born as a wolf in the wild and the forest, and it has to hunt, and it hunts to survive, and that's basically its existence. And it is an apex predator, but it's an apex predator in a very harsh, cruel climate. That's why the wolf is often seen more as a scoundrel, or as a thief, or as someone who has to be sneaky, right? A wolf kind of has to go and hunt and be a little bit more tenacious. Whereas if you compare it to a lion, the apex predator in Africa, let's just say, the lion doesn't really have to play by those same rules because it's in a much more plentiful, bountiful land of resources and animals that it can hunt all day and night. And that's why when you look at cats and dogs and how cats and dogs are so different from one another, you look at a dog basically, wants to be told what to do, right? Because the wolf has been born into the wilderness and the forest. It has to figure things out. It has to basically be Earth's bitch and just deal with the harsh realities of how that environment is, because there's not a lot of food that exists in those kinds of climates. Whereas in Africa it's a little bit different, where if you're a lion or a cat, feline based animal, you don't really have to play by the rules. You can kind of just be the king and just sort of oh yeah, let's go hunting and we'll find a pack of elephants because that's easy. If you find a bunch of elephants, you're pretty much eaten for a while there. Where a wolf, there's not really many elephants in the forest. You're pretty much hunting deer, which are very fast, very difficult to hunt. Elephants, they're big, but if you can corner one, you can get a lot of meat there pretty easily. But these are very specifics dealing with animals, but they come into contact and come into direct relationship when you start understanding the spirit animal aspect of things, because the spirit animal is ourselves, right? When humans were figuring out how to survive in these different environments, the way they did that, the way they learned, because don't forget, we're nomadic in nature. We originated in Africa, supposedly, although there's evidence now that they've found earlier bones in Greece. Either way, it doesn't really matter. Basic anthropology knows that humans were nomadic and they traveled and they went across different continents into different realms, and that's why we have people that existed in North America when that was discovered, and South America, and so on. And the way these people survived was by looking at animals. How did animals survive? And this is kind of the aspect where when we look at our ethnic background and our history and our ancestral history, is where we can actually get in touch with the spirit animal of ourselves, because how we survived in those environments was probably based most upon our cultural background, first of all, and where our cultural background found its influence from. So if you found that your ancestors were hunters back in the day in the north, in the Nordic countries, then you probably mostly identify with the wolf, so to speak. Or if you were a more native aspect, you have ancestors from Africa and you lived in a communal tribe, and it was very much based off of a matriarchal society, and you will probably identify more with a deer or a gazelle. A gazelle would probably be in Africa. I don't really know much about animals that way, but it's interesting to think about in that way, because where we find our spirit animal is coming down to our genetic history, our genetic background, and how, as humans, when we were living in those circumstances, how we learned from other animals to survive, and how we internalized the animalistic traits inside of us, and it has repeated throughout generations. So we're kind of rooted in the nature of those animals. That's why you find these fursonas that exist, because people identify with animals. And this is also coming into aspects of past lives, past life experiences, right? Reincarnation, we're getting back into that. You could have spawned from a previous life where you were an animal at one point or another, and you might have been a lion or a wolf or a whatever, a made-up animal, a witten, as I've seen one, which is a combo of a wolf and a kitten combined, which is more, I would say, like an egotistical recreation of an animal that's still a part of you, but you're just recontextualizing animals into your own creation, which is fine. But at the end of the day, I find that over identifying with the animal can leave you kind of trapped, if that makes sense. It makes you kind of trapped in the mindset of what an animal is supposed to do. That's why a lot of furries are serious sex addicts and porn addicts, because what do animals do? They like instant gratification. They just fuck. If they want to fuck, they fuck. If they want to procreate, that's what they'll do. And porn kind of taps into that animalistic trait. So that's why you find people who overly identify with the spirit animal tend to have a lot of issues with addiction, specifically to sexual aspects, right? I know this from personal experience, but this is something to keep in mind when comparing the fursona and the spirit animal, and how can we use the spirit animal to our benefit. And that's from the wisdom of survival, so to speak. How do we get through this difficult situation? And that was what our ancestors did. When they were encountering difficult situations, they would look at animals. What did this animal do? And they internalized that. And I think that's the important aspect of how we can utilize a spirit animal in today's world without getting caught up in a fursona, so to speak, without overly identifying with it, because we're still humans. We're still on a human journey in this world, in this life that we're living in. And we can utilize these animalistic aspects of ourselves that do exist. They are in us, but we don't necessarily need to identify with them, because I think that's a dangerous road to take in terms of, what's best for you as a human being. And, this is the thing where it's like, the animal within us can also lead to different aspects and breach into different degenerations of our character. And this is why we kind of see, like, look at the movie Wolf of Wall Street. What does the wolf do when it's in a context of survival within the capitalist world that we live in, the crazy money-hungry world? That's coming from a wolf's perspective, because the wolf had to survive. It had to scoundrel. It had to be clever. It had to be sneaky. It had to steal from things, right? When farmers had their sheep and whatever, the wolf would come in and steal the sheep. And that's kind of what that language and that way of thinking has transitioned into the modern financial world, dealing with money. wolves in the financial world are trying to steal as much money because that's their survival instinct. That's their predatory instinct. That's a part of their nature that they are overly identifying with, so to speak. And it's sort of corrupting the human aspects of their mind, or the deeper aspects of their mind, where they can ascend to higher realms of consciousness or higher realms of experience in life that aren't just based in primal instincts. And this is the other thing, is that these instincts shouldn't be seen as a negative aspect. It's only negative if you are overly attaching yourself to it, because these instincts are very helpful to get people motivated to commit to things in their life, to strive, to struggle. That's why there's a lot of emphasis on understanding struggle and understanding what you need to do with your life and working hard in that general aspect of things, right? Which is the aspect of the animal instinct being tamed to your best benefit. And when the Fursona gets mixed in, it's a little different. When people identify with the Fursona aspect, they're kind of, it's a lot softer, so to speak. Let's just put it that way. It's not as cutthroat as real animal survival. I wouldn't call it natural in the slightest. It's very weird. It's a very distorted aspect of animal instincts, because aside from just sexual gratification, it's like an over glamorization of like Disney characters almost. It's like they've internalized the spiritual connotation and the animalistic connotations of Disney characters and internalized that into themselves. So now they can identify as a Disney character almost, which is kind of funny that that's even possible. But when we think about how we ingest and digest so much media, that becomes a part of us. If we really internalize it, especially from a young age, those things become who we are. And this is the thing with the Fursona, is that it's kind of mixing in that cutesy, cartoony childishness aspect within the spirit animal that's already been there since generations. And it's creating this weird, fucked up rendition of it that's a little bit weird, and yeah, it's just weird. But if people are into that, that's totally fine. They can do what they want. But I would say, from my own experience and understanding where we can go in our lives to experience happiness or contentment, as is more fulfilling, I would say, is overly attaching to the animalistic aspects of ourselves is going to distract us away from achieving contentment and achieving, I guess you would call it, enlightenment, right? So I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit me up on my email and subscribe to my YouTube membership program. Peace.